Welcome to the Nature Teaching Professional Development webinar series. My name is Rod Williams. I'm a professor and extension wildlife specialist with Purdue University Extension. Today's webinar is entitled Animal Tracking Part 1. This will be a 30-minute webinar covering parts of animal tracks, types of tracks, and how to read tracks in nature. If you're unfamiliar with animal tracks or tracking, this webinar will provide the background information needed to complete animal tracking parts 2 and 3 in our series. Joining me today is a great animal tracker, also my friend and colleague, Bob Cordes. Bob is a biologist from the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. He'll be presenting the background information on animal tracks and finish up with some tips on how this information can be used in the unit Animal Tracking and Diversity. I'll finish up the webinar by highlighting additional resources and procedures needed to obtain your certification of completion. Bob, at this point, I'm just going to simply turn things over to you.
Thank you, Rod, and greetings, everyone. As Rod said, I'm a wildlife biologist and the Special Projects Coordinator for the Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. And today I'm going to share with you some of my experience with animal tracking and hopefully give you some pointers to better help you navigate through the units of animal diversity and tracking. So why do we want to learn about animal tracks? Well, we can explore the who, the when, the where, the how, the why of different species on your chosen property. That could be your school grounds or, if you have access to other properties, field trips, whatever. And, we use this as wildlife professionals to determine a variety of things. We can look at presence, absence. Does that species occur there? Does it not occur there? We can look at relative species abundance of that species. How many foxes are on your school ground? We can look at the diversity of species on that property. What number of species? Do we have foxes and coyotes? Do we have gray foxes? Do we have mice? I think as you go through this, you'd be surprised to find out what is occurring just around your school. And then we can also use these techniques to look at population trends over time. And, again, we do use these as professionals. Here in Maine, we use these kind of techniques for fur bearer tracking. Specifically, we look at lynx tracking and we look at presence, absence, and relative abundance. And so some of these next tricks, we're going to look at the basics of foot types. And so we'll start out with plantigrade. And these are species that walk on the entire soles of their feet. So we have raccoons, bears, and they walk like humans. So just picture yourself, how you're walking, how your foot implants on that ground if you were having bare feet, and that's how those critters walk. The next style is digitigrade, and as that term highlights, that they walk on their digits or their toes. And the species groups that use this are the canines, the felines, the cats and dogs, the weasel family, so your otters and weasels and mink, and so they're walking on their toes, and you can see pretty clearly the toe pads here showing up. So that's digitigrade. And then we got the unguligrade, and that's where they walk on the tips of their toes or toenails. And this is our hoof stock. So ungulates are deer, moose, elk, cows. So they're animals with hooves, and so they're really walking on their toenails and they're on their toe pads. And we'll get into the parts of the foot next. So the parts of the track we have up here, we can show our toenails or claws. We have our toe pads or toes showing our digits, digitigrade. We have this interdigital space here, so that's the space in between the digits, also known as negative space when you're tracking. And then we have the metacarpal or heel pad. And those are pretty key components to identification. Then we'll look at some important track patterns and measurements we want to take a look at when you're investigating tracks. We want to look at track length and track width. They can tell a lot about the relative size of an animal. We'll look at stride and straddle, the gait and behavior of animals. So the track length and width are pretty simple measurements taken of individual tracks. When we're actually using this in the field, as I'm following an animal, I like to take 3 or 4 sets of tracks and measurements and average those out. But in this case, you know, we have a nice ruler that is hinged in the middle, and the length of that track is the tip of the toe pad to the back of the heel pad. So we take the measurement in this full track, the tip of the toe to the back of the heel pad, and that's about 2.5 inches. Then we look at the width, and it's the widest part of the track from left to right, or in this case, north to south. And that again is about 2.5 inches in width for this particular track. We can tell a lot depending on your reference. You know, in the end, we'll go over some reference material for you, where to find out certain sizes of tracks, and that can start narrowing down which species you're looking at and really help you to key that out. Next, we'll look at stride, and stride is taken several different ways depending on your resource, but it's often the heel of the left foot to the heel of the right foot. Or depending on your reference, that's also the heel of this foot to the third foot. So it's the same foot. So that, depending on your reference, that is stride. And that's a very useful measurement to determine the size of an animal, particularly when you take this measurement from this heel to this heel without the tail or the head. That's the approximate length of the body if the animal's walking. So you can rule out a lot of animals when you're tracking to say what this is and what this isn't. And we've responded to several different cougar sightings here in Maine. We don't have a population of cougars, but we do have lynx. And using this stride and straddle, which I'll talk about next, we can really rule out the size of a cougar when we can narrow this down from the size of the stride and straddle. So they're pretty key measurements. And so the straddle, again, is taken in several different ways. And so this is either measured between the left track and the right track in that distance, or more commonly, it's the outermost of the left track to the outermost of the right track. And it really, again, depends on your reference source of what measurement they're using and what animal you're looking at. But again, as an animal's walking, it's really the relative distance between that animal's shoulders or hip joint. And so most animals, there's a few exceptions to that. Most of our mammals can't really rotate their arms out sideways. So that really approximates the width of their body, and that will help you kind of rule out some species. If you take a red fox, for instance, you could almost take a string, and when an animal is walking or trotting, and we'll talk about gait here in a second, but you could take a string and almost lay it right on that track. So they're pretty narrow, small animals. So next, the gait. And gait just refers to a way the animal is moving through the environment, whether it's walking, seen in this left here, bobcat tracks walking, trotting. So these are wolf tracks down a road, and they're really in a stride down the road, trotting. And then we have bounding. So squirrels use this. In this case, this is pine marten running through the snow, bounding through the snow. And so different gait types can give you clues on to what animal it is. And then behavior. What's this animal doing? And is that activity specific to one species or another? So in this left image, again, we have a couple of tracks, then a long body mark, a couple of tracks, a long body mark, a couple of tracks. Is starting to get harder to see. But there's really only a few animals that do this, and this is sliding behavior. And so river otters is the one that we've pretty efficient form of locomotion. They have a streamlined body, a couple of tracks, then slide, a couple of tracks, then slide. So that can help you rule out. And in the right picture, we're looking at squirrel tracks. And so this is a bounding motion. Again, the gait is bounding, and where it's leading to is a tree, and then the tracks disappear. So we can start ruling out some species by that behavior as well. And then a couple of terms that are direct register and indirect register. And those terms really refer to how the animal is walking. So it's left front foot, or look in the side of its right front foot and its right rear foot are almost completely superimposing on itself. So this is the right side, left side, right side, left side, and then so front and hind foot superimposed in there. And a lot of mammals move this way, a lot of wild animals. Then we have indirect register, and this is more typical of pets and where they have a lot of energy to burn. They're getting fed at home, so they don't have to worry about blowing this energy. And so their tracks from front and back tracks are laying right next to each other, or sometimes overlap, but not completely superimposed. So those are direct register and indirect register. And those, again, with behavior can kind of to help you figure out what animal you're looking for. And now we're going to get into some more tracking tips. And then we'll go into species specific groups. So I like to start out by not determining what it is, but I like to rule out what it's not. So that's a little easier for me. I can say, well, I'm certain it's not this. It doesn't have hooves, so we know it's not an ungulate. But we can also look, is it in the correct habitat? You know, if you're sitting in school property in Indiana, you certainly don't have lynx showing up. But you could have red fox and coyote, other things. And so some of our resources in the back will help you determine what is the correct habitat and what animals would you expect there. So that helps ruling out. What is the trail pattern? So we talked about the bounders, the hoppers, the walkers. And so are there specific animal, those animals will help you rule that out. And then, the following slides will be some of the key identification characteristics for the groups. How many toe pads does it show? Are the nails showing, which sometimes is an indicator between felines and dogs. But, some of those key characteristics, and you'll find those in your resources that we've outlined in the back. So the first group we'll talk about is the rodents. And rodents are pretty unique. They have two different toe types. They have 4 toe pads on the front foot and 5 toe pads on the hind foot. And the rodents include your chipmunks, your mice, your beavers, woodchucks, those kind of critters. And, they'll have different size feet. Sometimes they show nails. As you can see in this lower picture, you can see some nails. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't leave perfect tracks. And they often have this front feet leading first, and then their hips come over top, and their rear feet landing second. And so this is a typical pattern for the squirrel family. And those are identify the bounding pattern. Next, we'll move into the mustelids, or the weasel family. So this includes river otters, long-tailed weasel, which is pictured down below, mink, fisher, marten, and they have 5 toe pads on the front foot and 5 toe pads on the hind foot. However, one tricky thing about the mustelids is this 5th digit, and we'll just label it a thumb, but this 5th digit often does not show up in the track. So they could be confused with canids or the cat family, the felids. And I'll get to some more characteristics at the end of the show to really help you nail that down. But in a perfect track, which they don't always leave, the weasel family has 5 toes in the front, 5 toes in the back. And they often show nail drive. So next is our cervids, or our deer family. Deer, moose, elk belong to that family. And again, they're the ungulate and have your 2 hoof toenails here showing. Sometimes they will have these dew claws in the back, which are also will register in certain medium, but the main 2 hooves are what show and identify this group. Our lagomorphs are rabbits and hares. So here in Maine, we have New England cottontails and snowshoe hare. This upper picture is a eastern cottontail, which you would have in Indiana. And they show 4 toe pads on the front and 4 toe pads on the hind foot. And they have this typical triangular pattern where their 2 front foot land, again, their rear feet come over, and they have this triangular pattern. And you can kind of show which way an animal's traveling by this pattern. So as this triangular shape is going north, we'll just call this slide north. It's going in this northerly direction, the way this track's laying out on the slide. Then we move into our raccoon family. And raccoons have 5 toe pads on the front foot, 5 toe pads on the hind foot. And for me, again, they're this plantigrade walker. So they have their full heel pad or metacarpal pad is showing. And then, their toe pads, but for me, they look like fingers. So they often show very elongated and they look like fingers. And if you think about the form and function of a raccoon and the ability they have to manipulate things with their front feet, you can really show that they look like hands. Kind of visualize that when you're tracking these critters. And then our ursids, our bears. So here in Maine, we have black bears, and Indiana just recently starting to get some bears venturing in. They have 5 toe pads on the front foot, 5 toe pads on the hind foot. And one thing that really shows out about these, besides the size of their feet, is that, again, they're plantigrade walkers. And so their heel pad really shows up clearly. And oftentimes the toes may not register in certain mud conditions or sand conditions, but that heel pad really shows up, and that is a key characteristic in that animal. And then our only marsupial, the opossum, again has 5 toe pads on the front foot, 5 toe pads on the hind foot. And again, thinking about the form and function of the feet on this animal and their opposable thumbs, you can see where that thumb almost shows a 90-degree angle or a right angle. And if you look at both sides here, left and right, and you can see that toe on your forefingers showing, it's pretty clear. And as you gain more experience tracking, that pretty stands out pretty clear for me too. Next, we'll move into the dog family, and both the dog and the cat family have 4 toe pads on the front foot and 4 toe pads on the hind foot. And a lot of people use nails, the presence of nails, to determine the difference. That's really not a great way to look at it, and I'll go in more depth because these two families can be the trickiest to determine which is what. And so, here we have clear toenails showing. That's not always the case in these animals, but they're digitigrade. They walk on their digits or their toes. And the dog family includes coyotes and red fox and gray fox and wolves and your domestic dog. And our felids are a cat family. Here I have the bobcat on the top, Canada lynx on the bottom. They again have 4 toe pads on the front foot, 4 toe pads on the hind foot showing. And sometimes they can be mistaken for the canids or mustelids, as we talked about earlier. But here's just a little more help to go through those 2 family groups. And when you look at the dog family, the canines, they have great symmetry. And so if you draw a straight line connecting the outside of the left upper toe and the heel pad and the outside of the right upper toe and the heel pad, those lines are almost parallel. Similarly, if you drew a line across both front toe pads and rear toe pads, they would be almost a parallel line. If you do that for a cat track, connecting those 2 lines, they're just asymmetrical. You can't make those lines parallel very often. Sometimes you can be confused, but a typical track is that way. And continuing with symmetry, I'll call this slide X marks the dog. And so if you drew a straight line from the heel pad to the rear toe, and vice versa from left side to right side, it makes an X. And in the cat, you just can't make that. You can make an X, but it doesn't make this clear X. You can't see it show up. And once you see this a few times, it will start standing out in the track. So you can really see this X in this track. And it doesn't have to be a perfect track to make that. And then we talked about interdigital space or negative space. And on a canine track or a dog track, there really is not a whole lot of space in between the toe pads and the heel pad. There's just not a lot. And then you can see on this bobcat track that there is a lot of this negative space or interdigital space showing up in the track. And that often is a pretty key characteristic when your tracks aren't perfect. They're a little obscured. The other thing that's really distinct about these two tracks is they don't have a whole lot of hair on a dog track. So we call this a hair halo, and you can see in this snow track, which it shows up, and it's even more distinctive for a lynx, is there's so much hair on the outside of this track that's covering the toe pads, makes this hair halo. And then, another mnemonic here, our heel pads are different. And so we use this M for meow. So cats have this M shape. We'll go through this, the way their heel pad shows up is this M. Remember, M from meow, and X marks the spot. And so the canine family has this more triangular shaped heel pad. And that's really these triangled lines really show and mark this X. So that really stands out in all of your canines. And then again, this M for meow. And so, we've gone through some pretty key characteristics. I didn't get to be a decent tracker overnight. It took me a lot of years and a lot of resources. And so here's just a few that are available for purchase. Personally, I like the Tracking in the Art of Seeing by Paul Resendez. This resource has pictures of the feet in addition to tracks, so you can really get a perspective for the toe pads and the way that they function, and they would mark into whatever substrate you have. And if you get into lessons 2 and 3 in the animal diversity and tracking lesson, you get into making tracks and casts, and you can see the same thing as these feet and get a feel for how those tracks are being laid. And not that the Spalkin guide and the Peterson guide, and there's several others out there that are available. These are some of the ones that I have and use, and they're very good guides. And there's plenty more resources out there. Again, we have some resources, The Nature of Teaching the Common Mammals of Indiana. That publication has typical tracks, line drawings of tracks, and has key characteristics of animals, habitat. We're working on Mammals of Maine as a companion document there. So those are great resources to learn more about the animals you're tracking. And then some online resources, naturetracking.com is a pretty good resource. And then the keepingtrack.org is a website from a woman named Susan Morris, who does this as a professional. She's a professional tracker, taken several courses from her. She's outstanding. One of the things I picked up from her is when in doubt, follow it out. And so, if you're having tracks that you don't really know what are, just keep following them if you have the opportunity, and eventually you'll come across a track that really shows you what that animal is. So, just another tool of the trade there. When in doubt, follow it out. And then this is something that I've downloaded. I'll zoom in here. This iTrack app that's available for your phone. It's a pretty good resource too. Shows some pictures and some line drawings, and has some other sign besides track. So just a few resources for you. And then we'll go, so, I've shown you some of the tips that I use. Now you're ready to take your skills that you just learned and share those skills with your students and use them in the animal diversity and tracking unit with several lesson plans that's available for free download in the wildlife curriculum and the nature of teaching website. Now I'm going to turn that back over to Rod and have him wrap up the webinar.
Thank you, Bob. At this point, Bob, if you could just advance to the next slide. First, wanted to thank Bob for all that wonderful information. As I mentioned earlier, he is an outstanding animal tracker, and I encourage you guys to visit this webinar over and over to continue to learn from Bob as some of the information he's presented to you. I also wanted to thank you for joining us for the Nature of Teaching Professional Development webinar entitled Animal Tracking Part 1. I hope you consider participating in the webinars on Animal Tracking Part 2 and 3 to find out how to incorporate all the information that Bob just gave you into our 5 lessons, as well as your classroom. Furthermore, if you enjoyed this webinar, I encourage you to click on the card that should now be showing up on the top right of your screen, and allows us to visit the Nature of Teaching YouTube channel. And here you can view sneak peeks of the lesson plans that are directly related to your webinar that we just completed. Bob, if you could go back. So there's a couple of ways. You can either click on the card that came on the top of your screen. I've also embedded the YouTube channel URL in the PowerPoint slide that you see, or if you're in YouTube, you can simply search the Nature of Teaching in the YouTube search bar. These are all just 2-minute or less sneak peeks that really highlight the activities of all the lessons that we've created here in the Nature of Teaching curriculum. The last piece of information that I'll share with you is regarding your certificate of completion. And so to obtain your certificate of completion for this 30-minute webinar, you'll just need to click on the second card that should now be coming in on the top right of your screen. Once you do that, you'll be directed to a short Qualtrics survey that provides some feedback to us at the Nature of Teaching program. Once you complete that bit of information in that survey, you'll be automatically emailed a certificate of completion. So with that, Bob, if you join us back on again as we sort of sign off, we hope you enjoyed learning with us and consider participating in additional professional development webinars offered by the Nature of Teaching team. So with that, and until next time, we want to thank you for engaging our youth in nature. We'll see you soon.